that I have had with respect to a lot of our clients. So we need to keep crying up until the high heavens, even beyond when we become worse, that the Nigerian police, the chief culprits, should stop breaking the law, when constitutionally their job is to actually uphold the law and protect the citizens of Nigeria.
From this other angle, to what standpoint does the Nigerian Data Protection Act 2023 protect the citizens and the use of personal data? Because from what you said now, there's a section of the Constitution that is meant to actually back this up and create more. Is it that, are we having challenges with awareness of the fact that this act is actually meant to protect the citizens personally, or are we having the challenge that this act is actually not, fulfilling what it's meant to fulfill in terms of elaborating and giving Nigerians more awareness of what subsection 13 of the Nigerian Constitution says?
Okay, so the jab or the shadow boxing is between section 39 and section 37. So sometimes it's a delicate line. Section 39 of our Constitution gives the average Nigerian the right to express themselves, even though it puts some boundaries around it. And we must remember that the way one of the famous judges, especially I think it's an American judge, that interpreted it to mean that your right to throw a punch stops where my own nose begins. So yes, you have a right to express yourself, but you must mind the way you express yourself in a way that it doesn't contravene on my own rights, especially the right to the dignity of my person as enshrined in section 34 of our Constitution, and of course in civil law are protected by the various laws of civil defamation. Our court says criminal defamation is not our law. So civil defamation, not criminal defamation as the high and mighty, in a manner of speaking in Nigeria, the high and mighty that are Humpty Dumpty, is always a cycle of 2 years, a cycle of 3 years. They are high today, and tomorrow they are Humpty Dumpty that are falling from the fence and are completely scattered. I do not want to drop names of some of them that are presently going through the horrors and the shame of some of the ways they have turned over the rule of law in Nigeria upon its head. And of course, it's karma for them, and I pray that it continues befalling them until they learn lessons that power is transient, power is not permanent. I digress. So back to the issue. So you have a right to express yourself in full, of course, subject to limitation. While you have a right to express yourself, you must also remember that privacy is a right that is very, very spiritual and particular and important to the average human being. So you must respect that. It's a spiritual right. It's a spiritual right. You must respect that, and that is what the Nigerian Data Protection Act came to do, to make it more robust, to ensure that the data of people, their private lives, they are not abused, they are not transacted like the cheapest commodity on the market. You cannot just be selling my data like data controller. You can't just be selling my data as it suits you for your own commercial interest. You must think about my own person. The adverts cannot just be showing up on my phone, important to my algorithm, because you like Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, you have sold my information to people that if I had known, I would not have approved of. You are selling them to terrorists. You are selling them to people that I don't have religious affiliation with, and things like that. You are just treating me like a common animal, like a common commodity. So those are some of the things that the Nigerian Data Protection Act came to take care of generally.
Looking at it so far now, looking at this legal framework now, how well have you said it has been able to, take care of this concern in terms of awareness? And do you think the citizens, number one, first we need to even start with the citizens. Do you think the citizens are fully aware of this right? And do you know the right is basically, the act rather, is basically there to protect them? How well do you think the citizens of Nigeria know about this right? And second question is, have this act actually delivered what it's meant to deliver?
Okay, as a person that also consults for private organizations, yes, to a large extent, it has increased awareness, especially from the angle of organizations. Organizations now know that they have to have what we call DPOs, data protection officers within their organization, especially when they have gotten to some particular level. And data protection officers are supposed to provide guidance to the company in the way it handles data, not just of Nigeria, but data that pass through the doors of Nigeria. So a lot of people are becoming significantly aware, especially at the corporate level. But the average Nigerian citizen is yet to be as sufficiently aware as they ought to be. And thank you again for the discourse of today to put this again on the front burner, that the average Nigerian can sue a bank when they know that the bank has shared their details given to them in confidence, in infringing on their rights to privacy, as protected, not just by Section 37 of our Constitution, but by various and abundant provisions of the Nigerian Data Protection Act. So a lot of Nigerians now are approaching the court when they know that there has been a breach of the way that their data has been handled. Yes, they are suing various organizations now, and I'm calling on more organizations to be more aware and alive to these their responsibilities. They have to know that they cannot just share data. And when we talk about data is not something esoteric. It can be the picture of a client. It can be the name of the client. It can be as little as the phone number of a client. You can't just share it. You can't just give it out. And various other information that is capable of identifying a person, you cannot give it out. You must give it out either pursuant to a court order or with consent or in exceptional circumstances as created under the Nigerian Data Protection Act. If you do that without observing some of these things I've spoken about, then you are in breach. And of course, the courts are also using the organization as scapegoats now in order to pass the message loud and clear that the data of the average Nigerian, the right to privacy of the average Nigerian is one that has to be honored, and honored very, very highly. And the days of treating the average Nigerian data like it doesn't matter is gone. Nigerian courts are holding it the way the European courts are upholding the GDPR rules too.
Some reports abroad where it says emojis on social media now can be used to, agree on a deal or some kind of whatever, but you can use emojis to do that. But let's look at this angle now, which is, I think, is one of the biggest concerns. What are the biggest threats now to personal data privacy today? Like you mentioned now, you have clients that you're currently helping to, not to have their rights infringed on by organizations, and you're also creating awareness for organizations and Nigerians in general on how to, protect themselves in the digital space, or moreover in the digital world. So now, what are the biggest threats to personal data privacy in today's growing technological system? And also, my second question again, do digital laws give governments too much surveillance power over its citizens in the name of national security? Earlier on, you mentioned that the Nigerian police needs to do better in terms of surveillance and making sure they help protect the lives of citizens. So now, does this digital laws now give governments too much power for surveillance over its citizens? What's your take?
Yes, to a large extent, I feel that yes, there is.
We'll try to get Justice back while he tries to give us an answer to that question, because we've seen over and again where the privacy and data of individuals are being used without the consent of those individuals who own the data. Like he mentioned, it goes beyond sending out emails and giving out phone number. An image is also a data, and when all of this is being used without proper approval from the person that owns that data, it automatically might, linger or drag into what the person do not expect. Probably crime can be committed using a person's image or someone's data information, which would land the person in trouble. It's interesting to see that the citizens of Nigerians are beginning to understand and have clear understanding on what their rights are. Like he mentioned, that's talking about justice now. Like he mentioned, he says that there's a clash between subsection section 39 of the Nigerian Constitution, which says yes, every citizen has the right to express themselves, but there's also a contradicting part that says in section 37, which says depending on how you express yourself, it might lead you to into trouble. Yes, thank you so much, Justin, for joining us, and still awaiting your response. All the questions I asked, like I just to refresh your memory, I asked earlier, does the surveillance give government too much power over its citizens in terms of monitoring? And also, in our modern day now, what are the biggest, challenges or risks that are there in privacy today?
Okay, for me, yes, I think that surveillance, the laws as, on our books, they give the government too much powers. Especially some of us have been clamoring for the amendment of the Cybercrime Act as if, and the Terrorism Prevention Act. So some of us have been clamoring for that. That's number one. Number two, we also still need to have laws that directly prevent the agencies of government from going for the private data of the average Nigerian, from commandeering it from institutions like telecommunication institutions and all the other institutions. For example, in the US, even if you are CIA, before you can get the private data of an American citizen, the best situation, if even you do not want to let the citizen know so that it doesn't endanger your evidence gathering or investigation, you have to go to what's called the FISA courts. FISA courts, you must go as an agency of government, because they take the life and privacy of the American citizens extremely importantly. But Nigeria, there are no restrictions like that on the Nigerian government. Sometimes they don't even get a court order before getting the bank details. In fact, most times or all of the time, you go to EFCC, you go to ICPC, you are able to read the account of you check the account of your client on the computer of an EFCC official, and you have not even gotten a court order. They have direct access to all your bank information, to every. So what is secret? How are we humans in Nigeria? If our data is just everywhere with all the enforcement, I don't trust government. The government has shown us that we should not trust them every now and then. So why should everything about me be before them? Why should they be having to listen to all the calls I'm making? When El-Rufai said what he said, you know the funny thing, the Nigerian government did not come to robustly deny whatever it is that he said. That since they are listening to everybody, that he also listen to them. I may not be too happy or too comfortable with the fact that a private citizen said he's listening to the conversations of the NSA, but everybody is just distracted and moving with the flow. Nobody is talking about the other side. Is it true that the NSA, of his own accord, without a court order, is listening to my own conversation, is listening to your own conversation, is listening to the conversation of everybody as a Nigerian, without the court having the opportunity to check whether it is appropriate in the case, to check into your conversation? How will politics be balanced when the NSA can listen to the conversation of all opposition parties? How are we even still a country? So these are some of the things that we must look at. These are some of the challenges mitigating against the right to robust privacy in the country, and whether there is significant national power against the counterweight of the average level of rights provided by the Constitution adequately for the average Nigerian citizen. My answer is a loud yes, and I feel that as much as possible, the government should be curtailed. Yes, I'm for national security, and nothing is bigger than national security, but that shouldn't be the umbrella that law enforcement will hide upon to practically deprive us of all the rights that make us human beings. There's a reason why it is called fundamental human rights, and this is the reason why it is different from every other right. So I feel that as much as possible, this must be looked into again if we are going to call ourselves a democracy. If we are going to say we have not the semblance of the right to privacy, but actual right to privacy, the government should have its limits.
Obviously, there should be a line. There should be a place where a line will be drawn between national security and individual right based on the human rights, based on human rights. And we agree with you on that. But where should this line be drawn now? At what stage or at what phase do you think the line should be drawn between national security and individual privacy as well?
Okay, for me, I feel that it will depend on the facts and circumstances of the matter. But it should be the courts drawing the line, not me. And there are times when it will be too ridiculous and it will be too obvious that yes, and indeed, the government cannot possibly be calling this a national security issue. But where the lines are blurred, where the issue is a gray one, then it should be the courts, an independent court, not the hired court by these people, because sometimes they have their own choice of judges. It should be an independent judex that should be able to determine whether and indeed this matter is what this is stamping as national security in order for the government to be able to take over or probably strip the average Nigerian of their rights to privacy, and whether to leave the Nigerian to enjoy his own right to privacy. And I feel that our rights, fundamental human rights observation, has significantly gotten to that stage. We cannot have a situation in Nigeria where you can practically slap somebody and beat somebody and remove evidence from his pocket, and you can tender that evidence because we have a section 14 of the Evidence Act that proves you can do that. Whereas in America, they know that once you do anything to anybody that's a suspect, once you touch him or you don't read to him his Miranda right, he has the right to remain silent. And everything he does, anything that he does can be used against him. They know that if they do anything untoward, if you as much as touch a stand of hair on the citizen of America before extracting evidence from him, you will not be able to use that, you will not be able to tender that evidence in court. So I feel that in this situation, we should make a way with some of the provisions of our law. Aside from the provisions of our law, we should make a way from some kind of practices that make us back in the Stone Age. We should aspire as genuine democracies are and make the rights of the average Nigerian citizens as robust as the ones of those other countries are, so that our democracy too can mature to that point. It is one of the what we call Nobel laureates that won in economics recently said that one of the things that makes societies progress and societies prosper is when there is robust freedom. But when you keep clamping down, you make the state a police state like China, like North Korea, prosperity will be a thing that is far from the majority of the people. So, and we can't let our prosperity be one that is born of propaganda, or just lying and lying and banding figures, whereas evidence on ground does not show that. So these are some of the things again, it has to be left to the court. It is the court that will determine, oh, this is the red line. We cannot limit to the opinion of biased politicians. I think it was Nikki Toby that said it in the case of, I think it's the case of Buhari and INEC, that it is only the judex that is neutral. The average politician is biased. His stock in trade is being biased. The NSA is a biased person. The Minister of Defense is a politician. The only minister that will ought to be for the Nigerian people in Nigeria is the Minister of Justice. But again, unfortunately, he is not the Attorney General in the real sense of an Attorney General. He is merely a minister and a Minister of Justice. And even he is doing the bidding of the powers that be. I commend it to the case of Rivers State and the state of emergency. So these are some of the things that we have to look at, and I cannot trust a politician with protecting the right to privacy of the average Nigerian, because it would be like putting the fox to guard the hen or making a python to guard the eggs of a chicken. We all know the destiny of the hen and the chicken in both cases.
Quickly, Justin, before I let you go, I know you said you have a meeting in less than 10. Well, can digital monitoring ever be justified without compromising civil liberties? Like you mentioned, looking at the framework, the judicial framework of Nigeria, and Nigeria as a sovereign democracy, as a sovereign nation and a country that practices democracy, the faith of the common man now relies on the laws of the land, just like the constitution. So now, how in national security, like you mentioned, something that is very, very important as well. Can digital monitoring now be ever justified without compromising liberties?
It cannot be justified. It can only be justified if it is approved by a court. So there is no way I will allow the Nigerian politician, the biased Nigerian politician, to be in charge of the privacy issues of the average Nigerian. It can only be justified if it is approved by the court. If you have the imprimatur of the court, that's the only way I can justify it. But if it doesn't have the approval of the court, I will never ever justify the surveillance of the average Nigerian by the average politician. I must tell you that it doesn't even matter what the excuses are. It will say terrorism, it will say this, it will say that. See, in the case of Liversi and Anderson, Lord Atkin it was who said that amid the crash of arms, the laws are not silent. And that was a situation where a person who is a German and I was doing business in England during the Second World War, a German. You remember, it was Hitler and his army, the German army, that was fighting the English. But Lord Atkin, in that case, it was who said that amidst the clash of arms, despite the fact that Berlin was dropping bombs on London, amidst the clash of arms during that war, during the Second World War, the laws cannot be silent. The laws must still be observed. Even in a war, there are laws of war. So I will never ever give my imprimatur under any guise or excuse to the Nigerian government comprising of very, very biased and unfair politicians to have their way of surveillance over the data of the average Nigerian. So I will never ever give a stamp of approval to that.
Well, so far now, the whole hope of a common Nigerian man still turns back to the judiciary, as they'll be looking to make sure that the right of the citizens and their privacy, to be more specific, is not being infringed, like you mentioned, by politicians and controlled by the NSA. Thank you so much for taking our time to join us on today's edition, and most thank you for all of your insightful points that you made during the conversation.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
All right. We'll be going on a quick break, and then when we return back, I would be continuing this conversation with another guest here in the live studios who would help us understand other aspects of this conversation in line with Cybercrimes Prohibition Prevention Act of 2015 in tackling cybercrimes and online related fraudulent activities. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this break. Many thanks for staying with us. If you're just joining, this is Discourse here on Global Television. I am Samuel Odi. We've been having conversation earlier with Justin, who joined us virtually from Lagos State. And then we had conversations around the impact of digital and also how we could marry or balance national security and individual privacy. To continue and push this conversation further, I have a guest who will join me live in the studios. Uli Abomofebe is a public commentator and also a broadcast journalist. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Samuel. It's a pleasure being here.
All right, this conversation is something we've been having, and it's very necessary to have at this time, looking at how technology is ravaging and taking over all over the universe. You are a father. What would you say that the Nigerian government have done in terms of trying to provide laws that would regulate this space? We've seen countries like China, Syria, even Ethiopia here banning social media and placing some strict regulations on some platforms. So how have Nigeria now been able to manage this ecosystem that is growing rapidly?
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me. I think we need to start from the basics, right? We need to begin with the evolution that we have seen in technology, which ostensibly is the factor driving all of these social media trends that we're seeing. And then in the middle of it, for particularly countries in Africa, where you have so much conservative tendencies, you realize that it's more disturbing, especially when, again, you look at the fact that Western countries that one would have thought are even liberal about things like this are beginning to tighten the noose in the manner of speaking. They are looking at different frameworks. They are putting guardrails in place and things like that. Recently, we saw Australia, just before I come back to Nigeria, we saw Australia, what they did, saying that, look, there's now a ban on social media for people who are below 16. So you've got to be 16 or older for you to have access to social media. Of course, there's a law in that regard, and the law is very clear. But you see, they moved beyond law to now put real measures in place, all right, using, again, technology, which requires you to make huge, humongous investments, right? So that's where I'm coming to in the case of Nigeria. So it's not enough for you to make those laws. I mean, you can have all the acts of parliament, you can talk about legal frameworks, but how do you drive them? How do you interpret them? How do you make it a systemic kind of, if you like, atmosphere for parents, for communities? Because the whole idea is to ensure that ultimately people are responsible for what they consume on social media. And for you to have that happen, it means that you must be able to, I don't think the word is regulate, it means you must be able to censor, as it were, whatever it is that they have access to. So you want to start with the age bracket. So say, look, you've got to be a minimum of this age for you to have access to social media. Before now, what China had done, what we had even seen in countries in the Middle East, was to say, look, let's put, if you like, let's ban Facebook, let's ban YouTube, let's ban Instagram. But they realized that wasn't working. So they said, look, if we continue on this path, especially for Western countries, of course, we will ultimately be trampling on people's rights, which again will be a situation where you're trying to, I mean, you're creating two problems in a bid to solve one, right? So, in the case of Nigeria, my question is simple. Yes, we have all of these laws, cyber crime, prevention, prohibition acts, and what have you. But at the end of the day, how many Nigerians are even aware you have these laws beyond what they see on the news, for example? Is the National Orientation Agency driving, all right, the imports of that law, the intention behind that law? Within the purview of Dr. Bosun Tijani, the Honorable Minister of Innovation, Digital Economy, yes, and Communication. So, are we investing in that direction? Are we bringing in the best hands? Are we following best practices? We must see that happen. It's not enough for you to tell people X or Twitter, as we used to call it, is dangerous. Or you have to avoid Facebook. That won't work now unless you want to live in denial, unless you want to lie to yourself. So we must invest in technology. For example, in the case of Australia, what have they done? They've put in place several algorithms that help to define or determine, I should say, your age. So it's not a question of Samuel Odi being 24 years. For example, and it's lying to us is 31, or it's 13 years, it's lying to us is 18. We don't trust you. That's the presumption. So we put technology in place to help us double check, or in some cases triple check. Yes, your age. All right. I mean, why do we have AI? Why do we have deep thinking or deep learning? Why do we have machine learning and all of that? So they are bringing all of these together to drive this narrative. So the question is Nigeria, especially regulators, public agencies, are they listening to what is happening across the world, what other countries are doing? It goes beyond just planning election every 4 years. We must look at this and understand that social media is not just a space where people go to air opinions. Social media, all the platforms involved, have now become more like tools that redefine society. So every country, including Nigeria, now has a choice as to whether they want to determine how they are defined or redefined or not. And for you to do that, you must move beyond legislation and now embrace technology going forward.
Okay. You mentioned national orientation agencies, if they've been equipped enough, but do you think that the Nigerian system, you mentioned the Ministry of, the Minister of
Communications, yes.
Do you think enough is being done for these agencies to actually disseminate this information and create more awareness to make Nigerians aware of these laws, and how effectively would that be if the masses are aware of what laws are on ground and how they can use that to, sue those that would, in a way, maybe infringe on their privacy and their rights?
I know people say, well, lawyers basically will say ignorance of the law is not an excuse, and that's quite trite. But here's the thing, right? We live in a country where it's more politicking and politics than you have human angle, citizen interests, initiatives, all right? So the question is, in a country where you have 109 senators, where you have 360 members of the House of Representatives, right? Which of these guys are going back to their senatorial districts, their respective constituencies, to say, look, we have a new bill in place now. It says X, Y, Z. This is the blessing that comes with it. And this is the set of repercussions that come with it as well. And this is where we want you to take responsibility going forward. The governments across the world are not saying you can't use social media. They're only saying you have a responsibility to use it responsibly. It's as simple as that. So what's the point here? The point here is, in the case of National Orientation Agency, the question is, how much of interagency collaboration does he have? How much is he working hand in hand with the National Assembly, with the different ministries, with the different departments, with the different... For example, things had already, long come to a head before we saw the NOA coming to talk about issues of spraying money at civil, what's it called? Yes, social events and stuff like that. So the question is, what if things had not gotten that bad? Would the National Orientation Agency have taken initiative? Those are some of the issues. And then in the case of the ministry, which is headed by Dr. Bosu Tijani, for example, what are their budgets to start with? And what are their priorities, especially for, say, the 2026 fiscal year? So these are things we must look at again and again and ask ourselves, are we putting our money where our mouth is?
Okay, looking at global best practices, we've seen countries which have tried to regulate this, and at some point during the era of President Muhammadu Buhari, we saw X being banned in Nigeria, and a lot of Nigerians lost millions of naira that are running, because most of them get to do their businesses on those platforms. That just happened out of the blue. Should there be regulations that will help the citizens of Nigeria if the government wants to, regulate things like this? So these platforms, do you think they should have like a town hall meeting to have proper clarity on why these restrictions and bans are coming? And is it will it be a best practice for those who trade, who handle whatsoever kind of business on those platforms, get a time to be able to divert their business somewhere else? Do you think that should be in place?
The thing is, every time the government comes up with some sort of laws, you hear people, opinions are divergent. Some people say, well, it's a welcome development, it's timely. Some people even say it is long overdue. Conversely, others say it is draconian, it is anti-people, it is ill-timed, and stuff like that. But here's the thing. One of the things you're saying when government rolls out, or if you like, passes laws like this, is that it is always often accused of not consulting widely. And that is very important. Laws are for the people. So it becomes, if you like, counterproductive if the same people now say that you didn't consult with them, all right? Or you just consult with a narrow kind of, set of persons.
Probably like minds.
Yeah, exactly. And then the next thing you know is you move on, and the next thing you know, we're told that there's a new law now, and people are wondering, what was the process? And then that's when you see the National Assembly moving things real fast.
Yes.
First reading, second reading, third reading, passage, president assents to it, becomes law. At that point in time, no matter how much you criticize the process that produced that piece of legislation, it is now a law. There's next to nothing you can do about it, unless, of course, you want to go to court for interpretation, which may also hit a brick wall. Unless, again, of course, there is now a legislative or a parliamentary procedure to say, let's repeal, and replace and things like that. So, long and short of the story is, for you to do all of this, government must first of all consult. Then, excuse me, we must also realize that for people who feel their rights have been infringed upon,
Yes.
For example, like we saw with, like you mentioned, the case of former President Muhammadu Buhari, now deceased, ex-Twitter as it then was banned for a long time. I think that was in 2021.
Yes.
Fact of the matter is, under such instances, there are two options really open. There may be others, but I know of two. One is advocacy. So you must find civil society groups, civil society organizations that, whose work focuses on human rights and things like that, coming out to advance these issues. Then you can also use litigation as an option, all right? Especially as it has to do with class action. A bunch of people who feel their rights have been trampled upon. For example, like you mentioned, you have millions of young Nigerians home and abroad who use Twitter or X, as we now call it, for business. So what happens to them? These are people who are doing legitimate work on those platforms, all right? You can't deny them that access. So we must now ask, on the final notes, what is the reason for the ban in the case of Twitter? Did it serve the overall interest of the people? Because at that point in time, the information that was largely available to Nigerians everywhere in the world was that the president's tweet had been taken down. That was the motivation for banning Twitter. How did that serve the interest of majority of Nigerians? I'm here to understand.
Okay, we're talking about policies and privacies and also their terms and conditions.
Right.
Probably, when the tweet of Mr. President at the time, late President Muhammad Buhari, got taken down, probably did not get to meet the terms and conditions of that said platforms. But what reforms are urgently needed for the Nigerian digital space to, properly regulate and marry national security and individual privacy without infringing on a citizen's rights, fundamental human rights?
Here's what I realized. I've taken out time I've been using the internet since 2001. And one of the things I've come to see over time is I don't know of any platform, any major platform, I don't know of any, that doesn't have its terms and conditions, that doesn't have its what you call EULA, end user license agreements, which you have a responsibility to read before you sign up. For example, you say you want to open a Gmail account, you want to create a Yahoo Mail account, you want to join Facebook or X or Instagram or TikTok or whatever. You have the end user license agreement. You have the privacy policy. All right, you have all of those. Those are agreements. So once you click that checkbox and you say accept or okay or continue, it's like you sitting in front of a lawyer and you're signing a hard copy agreement. You're signing the dotted line, as they say. That's what it means. Once you have done that, and that service is provided for you going forward, you're liable, right? Much as you're enjoying the service. Now, add to that the fact that, Sam, as you know, these platforms are not Africans. Of course, they are not Nigerian. They are owned by Americans. And what happens with these entities, as we know, fundamentally is that they take the interest of American of the American people into consideration first.
Just like Donald Trump said,
right?
American
first, exactly. So that sense of nationalism is taken into all of these platforms, this software that they are building. So in the end, Nigeria and indeed other countries, especially in the so-called global south, would come last. Therefore, it raises two concerns. One, at what point are we going to create something indigenous? Everybody's running after TikTok, everybody's running after Facebook and YouTube and what have you. At what point are we going to have something that is Nigerian or indeed African? We must think about that. Second is to say, how much are we in touch with the owners of these platforms? I think the case of Twitter, as it then was, that we're talking about now, was an eye-opener, because that was when I remember, under the leadership of Lai Mohammed, who then was the Minister of Information, were now able to say, okay, let's bring Twitter to the dialogue table. Let's talk about what we can do with them. The issue of whether they should have their office in Lagos or somewhere in Accra, in Ghana. All of those issues came up. Then, of course, both parties reached an agreement, and then the ban was lifted. It's been some 5 or so years down the line now. Yes. But beyond all of that, the question is, have we learned any lesson in terms of ensuring we strike an equilibrium between national security concerns, which are very deep, which are very germane, yes, and the rights of citizens, because one should not suffer for the other. Because even the former president, again, God rest his soul, Muhammadu Buhari, yes, sparked controversy in Port Harcourt, River State, when he was speaking during the annual general conference of the Nigerian, the Nigerian Bar Association, and he said, I'm not quoting, this paraphrase, that look, when necessary, that national security has to override the rule of law. And you can't talk about the rule of law without essentially and altogether recognizing human rights, the rights of citizens. So government has a responsibility for to strike that balance. Yes. But you can't do that if you do not introduce reforms that have human face to them, while of course not leaving the door open regarding national security.
All right, not leaving the door really open regarding national security. It's like basically the highlight of all of this conversation, because national security is very paramount. It is. So national development, growth of the economy, and the primary duty of the president and the governors of each state is to protect the life and properties of their people. Thank you so much, Uyab Umufrebe, for taking our time to join us on today's edition of Discourse. And we'll hope to have more conversations like this with you. And this is how much time would permit us to take on today's edition of Discuss. I am Samuel Odi. I'll see you again as we discuss further. Bye for now.